The video camera was supposed to capture the ordinary life in the Olympic Mountains in the northwest of the United States. But what it recorded shocked the team of ecologists at first, and soon the entire world. Jason Clark, an ecologist from Seattle, was reviewing regular footage from the trail cameras set up in the most remote parts of the national park. His improvised office on the outskirts of Port Angeles smelled of coffee and pine resin. The walls were covered with topographic maps. For the past 3 months, he and his small research team had been documenting the lives of wild animals in the least explored areas of the reserve. Another day, another hour of watching squirrels gather nuts, Jason muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. A light drizzle was falling outside the window. He was alone in the office. Everyone else had left for the weekend. Sabrina had gone to a scientific conference. Paul had taken a day off, and Rebecca was at home, fighting off a cold. His feelings about this job changed almost every day. On the one hand, being a field ecologist gave him the chance to work in one of the most beautiful places in the country. On the other hand, spending hours watching similar footage of bears and deer could get really boring. When he agreed to join the project, Jason had hoped to find something unusual, maybe a rare species thought to be extinct. But after 3 months of work, the most interesting thing he had recorded was a family of coyotes hunting rabbits. At least that was the case until 7:42 a.m. on that rainy Tuesday. The video on the screen showed a narrow trail between ancient cedar and fir trees. The camera had been placed on the trunk of a tree, about 5 feet off the ground. Thick morning fog mixed with the drizzling rain. This camera was in an especially remote area, at least 10 miles from the nearest hiking trail and around 20 miles from any road. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the left side of the frame. Jason nearly fell off his chair, sitting up straight and pulling closer to the monitor. It was a woman. She stepped out from behind the trees, barely visible through the rain and mist. She was wearing something dark and tight-fitting, maybe a tracksuit, completely covered in dirt and stains. Her long, tangled hair stuck to her head and shoulders. She moved strangely, slowly with her head down, as if half asleep or extremely weak. Her shoes were in terrible condition, just remnants of what once had been hiking boots. Jason's heart was racing wildly. His throat felt dry. He knew this area well. There were no official hiking trails, no campsites, no shelters. Anyone who ended up there had to have serious gear. This woman looked like she had spent not just days, but months in the forest. "What the hell is she doing out there?" Jason whispered, leaning even closer to the screen. The woman slowly walked across the frame, at one point lifting her head as if she had heard something in the distance. For a moment, her face was turned toward the camera. Gaunt, sunken, with hollow eyes and sharp cheekbones. A long scratch ran down her cheek, covered in dried blood. And then she moved on, disappearing into the trees. Jason rewound the recording and watched it again. The third time, he noticed something new, a bracelet or a watch strap on her wrist. This was not an illusion, not a trick of light and shadow. This was a real person, somehow lost in one of the most isolated parts of the national park. Jason tried to think logically. Could she have been a lost hiker? But there had been no recent reports of missing hikers in the area. Besides, her conditions suggested she had been surviving in the wilderness for much longer than just a few days. He couldn't keep this to himself any longer. Jason saved the video file, took several screenshots, and immediately sent everything to his supervisor, Dr. Sabrina Yamada. He also called the park ranger service and reported his discovery. "Are you sure about the coordinates?" the on-duty ranger asked, his voice filled with skepticism. "You realize you're talking about an area that's nearly 20 miles from the nearest road?" "I understand that perfectly," Jason replied, feeling frustrated. "That's exactly why I'm calling. This woman needs help, immediately." Within hours, the video reached federal authorities, and within days, thanks to an inevitable leak on social media, the footage had spread across the internet. FBI specialists, forensic experts, missing persons, investigators, and curious viewers analyzed every frame, searching for clues. The survivor of Olympic, the woman who disappeared, the mystery of the forest hermit. The headlines multiplied rapidly. Experts proposed rational theories while the internet buzzed with the wildest speculations. Officials from the park and forensic analysts confirmed The video was absolutely real. What Jason had captured was not a hoax. There was truly a woman wandering through the forest in a state of extreme exhaustion. Authorities took the situation seriously. They reviewed archives of unsolved missing persons cases from the region over the past several years. The list was longer than anyone expected. Hikers who vanished on trails, local residents who disappeared on walks, even a few cases involving missing children. On the third day after the video was made public, when search operations were at their peak, a man named Michael Evans entered the scene. Jason was in a meeting with park rangers when a man around 35 years old burst into the room. His face was tired and hollow, his stubble several days old. In his hands, he clutched a printed screenshot from the video. "Where is she?" His voice shook with emotion. "That's my wife, Hannah Evans. She went missing 3 years ago." "Where did you find her?" The room fell into silence before erupting into chaos. Michael Evans provided photos of his missing wife, and the resemblance to the woman in the video was undeniable, despite her gaunt appearance and the changes in her face. The photos showed a young woman with dark hair and bright blue eyes, smiling at the camera, a stark contrast to the exhausted figure captured by the trail camera. "We were on a weekend hiking trip," Michael explained, his voice trembling. "We stopped at the Hurricane Ridge overlook. I went to gather firewood, and when I came back, Hannah was gone. Only her backpack was left at the edge of the viewpoint. We searched for weeks. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers, nothing. Everyone assumed she had fallen off the cliff or got lost and didn't survive. The case was closed after 6 months, but I knew. I always knew she was alive." Hurricane Ridge was about 20 miles from where the woman in the video had been seen. An incredible distance for someone without gear, but not impossible, especially over 3 years. The real question was, how had she survived all this time? And why hadn't she tried to make her way back to civilization? The number of search teams and resources doubled. It was no longer just a mysterious figure from a video. Hannah Evans, a real person with a story and a husband who had never stopped looking for her, had now become the focus of the entire nation. Jason couldn't get the image of the woman out of his head. Now that he knew her name, had seen her photographs, and had heard stories from her husband, she had become more than just a mysterious figure on a screen. She was a person who needed to be saved at any cost. He took unpaid leave and joined the official search teams, but the methods they used didn't seem effective to him. Too much noise, too wide a search area. If Hannah had survived in the forest for 3 years, she had likely learned how to avoid people. On the 7th day of the search, Jason decided to act alone. Armed with topographic maps and survival gear, he set off toward the spot where the camera had captured Hannah. From there, he planned to follow the direction she had been moving. On the 2nd day of searching, as he pushed through the nearly impassable undergrowth soaked with rain, he noticed something strange. The ferns and bushes were slightly bent, forming a barely visible path. On one of the leaves, there was a dark stain. Jason touched it with his finger. Dried blood. His heart pounded faster. This was the first real clue. Following the faint traces, he pushed through dense blackberry thickets, stumbling over hidden roots and stones buried beneath fallen leaves. He had begun to doubt whether anyone had really passed through here, or if he was just seeing what he wanted to see, when suddenly the forest opened up. He found himself at the edge of a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees. In the center of the clearing stood an old cabin, likely once used by loggers or hunters. It wasn't marked on any modern maps. The roof had partially collapsed, and the walls were covered in moss and lichen. But near the door, there was a neatly stacked pile of dry firewood, and a thin stream of smoke rose from the chimney. Jason cautiously approached, trying not to make any noise. His hand hovered over the door handle. Taking a deep breath, he knocked softly. Silence. Then, movement inside, the barely audible creak of floorboards. "Hannah?" he called gently. "Hannah Evans. I won't hurt you. I came to help." Silence again. Then slowly the door creaked open. Inside, the air smelled of smoke, dampness, and something else. A mix of earth, sweat, and wild herbs. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the walls and the holes in the roof, illuminating the sparse interior. A fire pit made of stones in the center, A rough table built from old planks, a few tin cans, and small animal pelts arranged as bedding. And there, pressed against the far wall, stood Hannah. She looked like a creature from another world. Her once slender body was now shockingly thin, her skin tanned and roughened from constant exposure to the elements. The bright blue eyes from Michael's photograph had faded, now wary and distant. Her arms and legs were covered in scars and scratches, the marks of 3 years of survival. She wore handmade clothing, pieced together from scraps of fabric and animal hides. Around her neck hung a pendant, the only thing that seemed unchanged from her previous life. "Hannah," Jason repeated cautiously, staying near the door so he wouldn't startle her. "My name is Jason Clark. I'm an ecologist working in the national park. We saw you on the camera footage. Everyone is looking for you." She didn't answer, but something shifted in her expression. Recognition, understanding. "Your husband, Michael? He's here in the park. He never stopped searching for you," Jason said quietly. "You're safe now. We can help you." At the mention of her husband's name, Hannah flinched, her eyes widening. She opened her mouth, but only a hoarse sound came out. She cleared her throat and tried again, her voice barely a whisper. "Michael is alive?" "Yes, he's alive," Jason answered gently. "And he never stopped looking for you." Moving slowly so as not to scare her, he took a bottle of water from his backpack and held it out to her. After a brief hesitation, Hannah stepped forward and took the bottle, sipping carefully in small gulps. Jason carefully pulled out his satellite phone and relayed the coordinates to the rescue team. A helicopter was dispatched immediately. While they waited for the rescuers, Jason tried to get her to talk. Slowly, in short phrases, Hannah began to share fragments of her story. She and Michael had been at the Overlook. She had stepped a little way down the trail to take some photos and slipped down a steep slope. The fall was long, and she lost consciousness. When she woke up, it was already dark. She was disoriented, suffering from a concussion and likely other injuries. She had tried to find her way back, but only ended up deeper in the forest. "I called for help," she said, her voice growing quieter, "but no one came. Then the rain started, so heavy. I couldn't find my way back. The first few weeks," she said, "were the hardest. Cold, hunger, fear. She built primitive shelters, tried to make fire, and ate berries and plants she remembered from hiking guides. Then I found this cabin," she said, glancing around at the worn walls. "There were old tools, hunting traps. I learned to catch small animals, gather wild plants." She fell silent, as if struggling to collect her thoughts. "I lost track of the days, only recognizing the change of seasons. I forgot words, forgot how to talk. Sometimes I thought this was all a dream, that my old life was a dream, that I had always been here." Her story was interrupted by the sound of an approaching helicopter. With Jason's help and assistance from a rescue medic, she managed to climb inside. As they lifted off, Hannah looked down at the shrinking cabin and the vast forest surrounding it, the place that had been both her home and her prison for 3 long years. A tear rolled down her cheek, but her expression wasn't sad. It was peaceful, as if she were finally closing one chapter of her life and opening another. The news of Hannah Evans' rescue, the woman from the Olympic Forest, as the media had already named her, spread across the world like wildfire. Hannah was reunited with Michael at a hospital in Port Angeles, where doctors immediately began treating her. Physically, she was severely malnourished, with signs of long-term starvation, numerous scars, and old injuries that had healed improperly due to the lack of medical care. But the real mystery was why she had never tried to return to civilization. For 3 years, Hannah could have attempted to find her way back, reach a hiking trail, or at least leave some kind of sign for the search teams that had combed the park extensively during the first year after her disappearance. Yet she had done none of that. During moments of clarity, when doctors and psychologists asked her about it, Hannah simply shook her head and said, "I don't know. The forest became my home. It was like I forgot there was another world." Psychiatrists diagnosed her with a severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative amnesia. But even they admitted that there were unexplained gaps in her story. The mystery of the woman from the forest remained unsolved. despite hundreds of interviews, medical tests, and psychological evaluations. And sometimes, as Jason had come to realize, some mysteries of nature are better left undiscovered.